My name is Evan, and I never thought I'd be the one writing this kind of thing. I'm not some diary keeper or memoirist. I've always believed in listening, not narrating. But recently, everything changed. My best friend, Layla, is spiraling, and I can't keep quiet anymore. I'm scared of losing her. I'm scared I already am. We've been best friends since we were 10. She was the loud, quick-witted girl in the back of the classroom with untamed curls and a contagious laugh. I was the shy one who barely spoke unless I had to. Somehow, we just clicked. From late-night talks on rooftops to college adventures and shared heartbreaks. We've seen each other through everything. But this is different. This isn't just heartbreak. It's self-destruction with a smile on her face. It started after her breakup with Nate. They were together for almost 2 years. At first, I didn't like him. Too smooth, too rehearsed. But she loved him, and he made her feel adored, at least in the beginning. When he cheated on her, it gutted her. She didn't cry in front of me. She just laughed and said, "I should have known." But her eyes told a different story. The kind of story you don't tell out loud. 2 weeks later, she started seeing someone else. A guy from her gym, then another from a dating app, then another. At first, I figured it was a phase. People rebound. People cope in weird ways. She's always been independent, always handled her pain on her own terms. But then she started telling me things I wasn't prepared for. "I hate the attention," she said, "but I crave it. It's like a drug. Like I'm trying to fill this black hole inside me, and it just keeps growing." I asked if she'd been to therapy. She nodded. I stopped going after Nate. Felt like talking didn't help anymore. I needed something else. Something else turned out to be meaningless hookups with men who didn't know her favorite color, who didn't know her laugh wasn't always real, who didn't know that she used to love writing poems about the sky. She started dating someone new in March. His name was Chris. Tall, polished, charismatic. He reminded me a little of Nate, and that worried me. But Layla had hope again. She talked about him with this cautious optimism, like maybe, just maybe, things were turning around. He broke up with her after 3 weeks. Said she was too much. I think that broke her more than Nate ever did. That's when the spiral turned into a free fall. She confessed to me, over the phone at 2 a.m., that she'd started sexting married men from work. One of them was in his 50s, twice her age. "He listens to me," she said. "He tells me I'm beautiful in a way that feels real." But her voice trembled when she said it. She wasn't proud. She wasn't even sure she was in control anymore. I begged her to stop, not because I was judging her, but because I could see the cracks forming. Cracks in her confidence, in her safety, in the core of who she was. She looked at me one night with tears in her eyes and whispered, "I don't know how to stop. I need help. I'm scared of myself." I took a deep breath and told her I'd help. Whatever it took. I'd be there. I didn't care if it meant staying up all night to talk. I didn't care if it meant finding her a new therapist or dragging her to appointments. But every time I reached out, I felt her slipping further. Her messages got shorter. Her social media turned darker. One day she posted, "It's easier to disappear than to explain why you're empty." That post still haunts me. I went to her apartment a few days later. She didn't answer the door. I let myself in with the spare key she gave me last Christmas. She was in bed, the curtains closed, her room filled with half-empty wine bottles and old takeout boxes. I sat on the edge of her bed and just held her hand. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just squeezed my fingers and closed her eyes. I don't know how long we stayed like that. Minutes? Hours? Time didn't matter. Only that she was alive and I was there. That was 2 weeks ago. Since then, she's gotten worse. She left her job. Said she couldn't face the looks anymore. I don't know what happened exactly. She won't say. But something changed. A shift in her voice, in her silence. Now she barely leaves the house. I'm scared to ask if she's still seeing those men. I'm scared to know the answer. She asked me once, "Do you think I'm broken?" And I said no. But the truth is, I don't know how to fix this. I've talked her through her emotions. I've encouraged her to start therapy again. I've reminded her of who she used to be. But is that enough? Have I done everything I can? Or am I failing her the way everyone else has? I started visiting her more often, telling myself I just wanted to keep her company, but really, I was checking to make sure she was still breathing. Her eyes looked vacant now, like the spark had been drained out of her and replaced with something numb, something cold. She used to fill every room she entered. Now she disappears in her own apartment. I bring her groceries she barely touches. I talk, hoping something I say will pull her back. Sometimes she just stares at the floor, and sometimes she laughs at nothing, and both scare me equally. There was a time when we were teenagers and she broke her wrist at a skate park, and she yelled at the paramedics for cutting her hoodie because it was her favorite. That was Layla. Wild, loud, impossible to ignore. That girl feels like a ghost now. One night, I found her journal open on the floor by the couch. I shouldn't have read it, but I did. I don't regret it. Every page was full of pain she never said aloud. I feel like a body wearing a girl suit. I don't remember what it feels like to be real. Every time someone touches me, I think maybe this is the time I'll feel something. I never do. I just pretend I do so they'll leave happy. At least one of us should. I sat there with the journal in my hands, my throat tight, heart pounding. I wanted to scream, to shake her, to tell her she was still there. She was still real. She mattered. But how do you argue with the voice in someone's head when it's louder than anything you say? The next morning I asked her, softly, "Do you want me to read something to you?" She shrugged. I read her a poem I remembered she wrote in high school. She didn't look at me, but I saw the corner of her mouth twitch. I kept reading anyway. We're not dating. We've never dated. People used to ask why not. You two are inseparable, they'd say. But it's not like that. Layla is the storm and I am the anchor. And sometimes anchors aren't what storms want. They just need someone who doesn't leave. So I never did. I told her once, "You don't have to be okay for me to stay. Just stay alive." She nodded, but her eyes stayed glassy. That same week, she told me she'd gone to meet one of the men again. I asked if she felt safe. She said no, but it didn't matter. What's safety if I don't care about myself? That hit harder than I could admit. She wasn't saying it to hurt me. She was saying it because it was true. I realized then that her body was surviving, but her mind wasn't. She was slipping away and waving to me while doing it. I called her mother. We've never been close, but I was desperate. Her mom listened in silence and then said, "She won't listen to me. She never has." Maybe she listens to you. That wasn't comforting. That felt like a curse. What if I failed too? What if I already had? I started texting her every night. "You okay? Drank water today? Want to sit outside for a bit?" Sometimes she answered. Sometimes she didn't. The nights she didn't scared me most. Once, I found her asleep on the bathroom floor. She was fully dressed, her cheek pressed against the tile. She looked peaceful in the most broken way. I sat there beside her, knees pulled to my chest, afraid to move her, afraid to leave. I wanted to shout at the world. At every man who used her. At every friend who drifted away. At every therapist who didn't help. At every night that felt like it swallowed her whole. But shouting doesn't fix what's broken. And she's not glass. She's not an object. She's Layla, and she's drowning, and I don't know how to swim fast enough to pull her out. Then one night she texted me something that shattered me. If I disappeared tomorrow, would it matter? I didn't breathe for a full minute. I called her. She didn't answer. I ran to her apartment like the floor under me was breaking. She was there on the couch, alive, but she didn't look up when I came in. I sat next to her and said, "Yes, it would matter. It would ruin me." She started crying then. Not quiet tears, but full-body sobs. The kind that don't sound like they're coming from a person. I held her and didn't let go until morning. After that night, something changed. Not a full miracle, but something small and real. She started texting me first sometimes. "I made coffee. I cleaned the sink. I haven't cried yet today. Little victories. Tiny, invisible trophies. And I celebrated every single one. I helped her find a new therapist. Someone who specializes in trauma, addiction, self-worth. She started going. Once a week, then twice. She told me the therapist doesn't fix her, just listens. And that alone is helping. I see light in her again. Not a bright sun. More like the moonlight that peeks through curtains at 3 a.m. But it's something. And it's enough. I know she's not better. I know healing isn't a straight line. I know some nights are still going to feel like drowning. But now she reaches for my hand. And I never let go. Last week she said something I've been clinging to ever since. I want to feel clean again. Not washed clean. Like my soul isn't stained. I didn't have the right words to answer her. So I just said, "You're not your past. You're not what happened to you. You're not what you did when you were hurting." She didn't say anything back, but she looked at me for a long time, and I could see something flicker behind her eyes. Maybe belief. Maybe just the willingness to try. I remember when we were 19 and we camped out in the woods for a weekend with our college friends. Everyone else passed out drunk and tense, but Layla and I stayed awake, wrapped in a shared blanket, watching the stars through the tree branches. She told me then, "Promise you'll always pull me back if I get lost." I said, "Even if you push me away." She smiled and whispered, "Especially then." I think about that night every day now because she's been lost for a while. And I've been trying to pull her back without breaking her. It's not easy. Sometimes she pushes so hard I wonder if she wants me to let go. But I won't. Because even when she doesn't believe in herself, I still do. A few nights ago she called me out of the blue. She was crying again, but it wasn't the heavy, hopeless kind of crying. This time it sounded like release. "I deleted all their numbers," she said. "Even the married ones. I blocked them. I'm done being someone's secret. I'm done being my own enemy." I didn't say anything right away. I just let her breathe. Sometimes silence is the loudest form of love. Then I whispered, "I'm proud of you." She started crying harder. "I didn't think I'd make it this far, Evan. I really didn't." There are days she still stares at the ceiling too long. Or turns her phone face down like she's afraid of what she might see. She hasn't gone back to work yet, but she's considering taking a part-time job at a bookstore near her apartment. I went there with her once. It smells like ink and old wood and comfort. She stood in the poetry section for 10 minutes without saying a word. Then she pulled out a book, opened to a random page and read, "Some days, I wake up whole. Most days, I build myself from scraps." She didn't cry. She just closed the book and nodded slowly. "That's me," she said, and I knew she was right. She hasn't touched alcohol in nearly 3 weeks. I asked if she missed it. "Not really," she said. "I miss what I thought it gave me. But now I see it just numbed what I was too afraid to face. Progress. Not perfection, but progress." We walk now almost every afternoon. Just the two of us and the sound of our shoes on pavement. Sometimes we talk about nothing. Sometimes we talk about everything. One day she asked, "Why didn't you leave?" And I told her the truth. "Because I love you. Not the way people love each other in movies. I love you in the way you love your childhood home. Even if the paint's chipped and the windows rattle in the wind, it's still home. You're still home." She didn't reply, but she slid her hand into mine, and we just kept walking. Some nights, she texts me poetry again. Little lines. Fragments of healing. Today I looked in the mirror and didn't flinch. I didn't answer his text, and I didn't hate myself for it. I laughed without faking it. These are victories. Not loud ones, but real. And I collect them like prayers. I started writing letters I never send. To the men who hurt her. To the people who ghosted her when she needed help. To the girl she used to be. I keep them in a notebook in my drawer. Because I need to bleed somewhere, too. Being the one who stays isn't easy. Sometimes I feel like I'm drowning right next to her. But I don't regret it. Not for a second. She asked me once, "Do you think I'll ever feel normal again?" I said, "I don't think normal exists. I think peace does. And joy. And wholeness. And I think you'll feel all of that again. Not because I'm hoping for it, but because I believe in you." She smiled then. A real smile. The kind that makes your chest tighten. And in that moment, I knew we were getting closer. Closer to the shore. I don't know how this ends. I don't know if she'll relapse. I don't know if some future man will reopen the wounds she's just now starting to close. But I know this. She's fighting. And so am I. Because love isn't always romance. Sometimes it's presence. Sometimes it's silence. Sometimes it's just showing up again and again, even when it hurts. She gave me a note recently. Just a folded piece of paper left on my dashboard. Inside it said, "Thank you for not giving up on me. You're the reason I didn't disappear." I cried when I read it, because that's all I ever wanted. For her to stay. For her to survive. And now, finally, I think she will. A few days ago, she called me just to talk. Not to cry, not to confess, not to spiral. Just to talk. She told me about a recipe she tried. It didn't turn out right, but she laughed anyway. She said she lit candles while she cooked, like she used to do before everything went dark inside her. That laugh, God, I hadn't heard it in so long. Not the performative one she gave to men. The real one. The one that used to echo off my walls when we stayed up too late playing old music and talking about dreams we were too young to understand. I asked her if she remembered our dream pact. Back when we were 17, we promised to travel the world together if we weren't married by 30. She giggled and said, "We've got 5 years. You better start saving." It was the first time in months she sounded like someone who believed she'd still be around in 5 years. And I didn't realize how deeply I needed to hear that. She's painting again. Small canvases, mostly abstract. She says she doesn't know what she's painting until it's finished. I told her that's kind of like healing. You don't see the picture until you look back and realize you're no longer broken in the same places. She looked at me, eyes soft, and said, "Sometimes I think you're the only person who ever really saw me." It broke me a little. Because if that's true, then what the hell did everyone else in her life see? Did they look away on purpose? Did they see the cracks and decide she wasn't worth the effort? I'll never understand how someone can witness pain and walk past it like it's not bleeding. One morning she texted me, "I want to go to the ocean." So we did. 3 hours in the car, mostly in silence, sometimes humming along to old songs we used to love. When we got there, she stood at the edge of the water, shoes in her hand, waves lapping at her toes. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then she whispered, "I thought I'd feel small here, but I don't. I feel human." I wanted to bottle that moment. Hold it up like proof. This is what healing looks like. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just quiet freedom in the way her shoulders dropped. The way her eyes didn't dart around looking for threats. The way she just stood still. Still. We stayed until sunset. She took a photo of the sky and made it her phone background. Later, she told me she named the picture Beginning, and I believed her. Back home, I noticed small things changing. She opens her windows now /. She puts fresh flowers in a vase near her bed. She reads before falling asleep instead of scrolling endlessly through strangers' faces. She answers my calls on the first ring. Last week, she went out to dinner with an old friend, one of the few who reached out again. She wore a yellow dress. She used to hate yellow /. Said it made her look tired. But that night, it made her look radiant. Alive. Whole, even if just for an evening. She texted me after, "I didn't think about them once tonight. Just laughed and ate and felt okay." That message felt like sunlight after a long, cold storm. I know she's not done healing. I know wounds like hers don't just vanish. But there's space between the pain now /. There's light filtering through the cracks. One night, as we walked by the river, she said, "You know what I miss?" I asked what. She said, "The version of me who believed love didn't have to hurt. The girl who trusted easy." I told her, "She's still in there. You're just protecting her now backslash." She nodded and squeezed my hand. We didn't say anything else. We didn't need to. She's not just surviving anymore. She's choosing. Choosing to stay. Choosing to try. Choosing to believe that she's worth more than the damage she's endured. And I'm still here. Still holding the rope. Still pulling gently when she needs it, standing back when she doesn't. I don't know what the future holds for her. Or for us. But I know this. She's no longer drowning. She's learning how to float. And maybe, just maybe, she'll learn how to fly. She started taking care of a small plant on her windowsill. Just a succulent at first. Then two more. Then a row of tiny green things reaching for sunlight. "I like watching things grow," she said one morning as she watered them with practiced hands. I smiled. "You didn't used to have patience for that," I said gently. She looked at me and shrugged. I didn't think I deserved to watch something live. That answer stayed with me for days. How easy it is to forget what we're worthy of when all we've known is pain. But she's remembering now backslash. Slowly. Steadily. We visited her father's grave on his birthday. She hadn't been in years. She brought a letter. Folded 3 times, tucked inside her jacket pocket. She didn't let me read it, but she read it aloud at the gravesite. Her voice didn't shake. Not until the last line. "I'm trying, Dad. I swear I'm trying." On the way back, we didn't talk much. But her shoulders were relaxed, her breathing even. And I knew something heavy had left her. Maybe not for good. But for now backslash. And that was enough. She invited her cousin over for tea last weekend. Someone she used to avoid because of family pressure and old wounds. They laughed in the kitchen. They talked about childhood summers and awkward teenage years and favorite foods. I heard Layla say, "I'm learning not to hide from the people who love me." She's cooking again. Really cooking. Not just reheating leftovers or surviving off coffee and crackers. She calls me over to taste test weird recipes she finds online. Some of them are terrible. Some are oddly good. But the food isn't the point. The laughter is. The life is. One evening she showed me a canvas with bold streaks of orange and black and blue. "I don't know what it means," she said, looking at it sideways. I said, "It doesn't have to mean anything. Sometimes it just has to exist." She looked relieved. Like someone had just given her permission to breathe. She's been sleeping better. The nightmares come less often. When they do, she writes them down instead of letting them fester. She keeps a notebook by her bed. "Words are how I empty the poison," she told me. "Otherwise it just sits in my blood." She's talking about the future now backslash. Not in hypotheticals or regrets. But in plans. She wants to travel. She wants to write a book. She wants to start a blog for women going through silent battles. I offered to help build the site. She lit up. That look of purpose is coming back. And I'd do anything to protect it. Some people think love is grand gestures. But sometimes love is just remembering someone's coffee order. Or charging their phone when they forget. Or sitting in silence next to them when their chest is full of thunder. That's the love I've given her. And the kind she's learning to give herself. She asked me once, "What if I fall again?" I said, "Then I'll sit with you until you're ready to get up." Nos cham. No pressure. Just presence. She nodded slowly, like she was letting herself believe that could be enough. And for the first time in a long time, she whispered, "Okay." She started going for walks in the mornings in spring. First, just 5 minutes around the corner. Then a whole loop around the neighborhood. She said the streets smell different when you weren't rushing through them. "It's like they're healing too," she whispered one day. I nodded, even if I didn't fully understand. Some things can't be explained, they can only be felt nearby. One day she brought an old box of school photos. We flipped through dozens of pictures. Laughter, awkward haircuts, teenage clumsiness. But there was one photo where she looked into the camera differently. Serious, deep, almost scared. "That was the day everything changed," she said quietly. I didn't ask what exactly. If she's ever ready, she'll tell me. A couple of weeks ago, she sent me a voice message. Not with a request, not with a question, just to share something. She was sitting on the roof, listening to the rain. "I'm not afraid of being alone when the rain speaks to me first," she said. I listened to that message several times. Because it was her voice. Real, calm, not pretending. She met someone new, a man unlike those before. Not an alpha, not a savior. Not someone who asked more than he gave. He read her favorite books. He asked how her day was, and waited for the answer. She didn't call it a relationship yet. She called it mutual presence, and it felt so grown up, so real. I didn't feel jealousy. Only relief. We sat on her balcony at night, when the city was asleep. She looked at me. There was no anxiety in her eyes, just the light from street lamps and a faint smile. "You didn't give up, did you?" she asked. I shook my head. "Never." Her voice no longer trembled when she talked about herself. Her walk had found a rhythm, not dictated by anxiety. She no longer sought proof of her worth in someone else's arms. She found it within herself. Not all at once. Not completely. But enough so she wouldn't fall that deeply again. Sometimes she still called me in the middle of the night. Sometimes the nightmares still came. Sometimes she still doubted herself. But now she knew she didn't have to hide behind that doubt. That fear wasn't a sentence. That pain wasn't something to defeat, but something to learn to live with. I knew she wasn't disappearing. She was coming back. Slowly. More like a whisper than a scream. But she was coming back. Spring turned into summer, and Layla's energy began to change. She wasn't smiling all the time, but when she did, it reached her eyes again. She had moments of silence that didn't feel like sadness. More like rest. Like breathing. One afternoon, we sat in the back of a bookstore cafe. She flipped through a novel she used to love. "I used to skip to the endings," she said, fingers brushing worn pages. "But now I think the middle matters more." That one sentence said more than hours of therapy. She started painting again. Not for money. Not for praise. Just to let her fingers speak the things her voice couldn't yet. Canvas after canvas, she poured out months of hurt, loneliness, and brief flickers of hope. Her apartment smelled like acrylic and tea. And somehow it felt sacred. She still avoided certain places. Certain names made her twitch. But she wasn't frozen anymore. She moved forward even if the weight still clung to her ankles. One night, as we walked through the city after a late dinner, she stopped at a mural. It was a chaotic mix of color and movement. Not pretty, not clean, but alive. "That's what I want to be," she whispered. "Not perfect, just alive." I didn't tell her, but I already saw her that way. Every breakdown. Every quiet rebuild. Every time she chose to stay instead of run. She was painting her own mural with her life. And even if the strokes were messy, it was the most honest kind of art I'd ever witnessed. She told me she no longer wanted to be desired for her body first. She wanted someone who'd memorize the way her thoughts tangled at 2 a.m. Someone who noticed when she picked at her nails during sad memories. Someone who wouldn't flinch when she forgot how to smile. She deserved that, and I reminded her of it every chance I got. Sometimes healing looks like a dramatic change. Other times it's just having one less nightmare per week, or laughing without guilt, or no longer replying to the ex who breadcrumbed you for years. Layla was healing in all those little, invisible ways. She once said to me, "I used to think love had to burn. Now I just want warmth." And that's when I knew. She wasn't chasing validation anymore. She was chasing peace. The day Layla turned 26, she didn't throw a party. She didn't post a picture. She didn't even answer all the birthday texts. Instead, she took the day off work and went hiking alone. When she came back, her shoes were muddy and her face flushed, but she looked more grounded than I'd seen her in months. "I needed to remember how it feels to be small in the best way," she said. "To be surrounded by something bigger than the voices in my head." I nodded, because I understood. Sometimes you need the trees and the wind to remind you that not everything in life is cruel or complicated. Some things just are. She didn't talk about the married men anymore. Not out of shame, but because those stories no longer held her captive. She spoke about them like an old injury, a scar she'd grown around. And I saw her reclaiming her own body, her own time, her own narrative. One weekend, she invited me to a gallery where she was showing 3 paintings. They weren't signed. She didn't want her name next to them just yet. "They're still too raw," she whispered. But when I looked at them, I saw strength. I saw messiness and survival and light. And in the corner of one, a small streak of gold. "What's that?" I asked. "Hope," she smiled. "Even when it doesn't fit." She still went to therapy. Still journaled. Still had the occasional night where she called me crying, asking, "Am I still broken?" And I'd always answer, "No, you're just still healing." Because healing doesn't mean forgetting the damage. It means learning to build around it, to carry it with grace, to understand that every time she chose not to reach out to someone who made her feel small, she was choosing herself. And that was a victory. Sometimes she still looked over her shoulder, still flinched at certain songs or smells. But the girl who once chased after being needed had become a woman who now asked herself, "Do I need them?" It was subtle, a new kind of defiance. Not loud or angry, just firm, certain, like a mountain that doesn't need to move to be powerful. Winter came early that year. The first snowfall arrived before the leaves had fully turned, dusting the sidewalks like powdered sugar. Layla called me that morning just to say, "I'm wearing a scarf I actually like. I think I'm becoming someone I want to be." And then she hung up. No long explanation. Just a small truth, shared like a secret between old souls. She started saying no more often. No to people who drained her. No to late-night texts from exes who wanted pieces of her but not the whole. No to the guilt that used to swallow her whole. And every time she said no, something inside her stood a little taller. We met for coffee on a Tuesday. She ordered herbal tea instead of her usual triple espresso. "I want to feel calm without caffeine," she told me, stirring honey into the cup. It was such a small change. But it meant something. A deliberate step away from chaos, even in the most ordinary choices. She no longer asked for permission to take up space. She laughed louder, cried openly, told people when they hurt her, even if her voice trembled. She wrote poetry in the margins of her planner. Not to share, not to perform. Just to remember that her voice mattered, even if no one else heard it. We went on long walks after work. Not because we had things to say, but because the silence between us had become a kind of safety. She told me once, "I used to hate silence. I thought it meant I was alone. Now I know it just means I'm not being interrupted." I asked her if she was still scared sometimes. She nodded. "But now I know I can survive the fear, that I don't need to self-destruct to prove I'm alive." And maybe that was the turning point. Not a dramatic moment. Not some tearful breakdown or miraculous recovery. Just a quiet acknowledgement that she had changed, and that the change was hers. Not for a man. Not to be loved. But because she finally decided she was worth saving. It happened on a Sunday afternoon. We were browsing through a used bookstore tucked between an old bakery and a florist. The place smelled like dust, paper, and cinnamon. Layla wandered toward the back, running her fingers along the spines of worn-out paperbacks. Then I heard her voice, soft, startled. "Evan?" I turned. A man in a navy wool coat looked up from the poetry section. He blinked, then smiled, eyes widening with recognition. Layla. Wow /. It's been what, 3 years? She stood still, unreadable for a second. Then she gave a small, controlled smile. Something like that. They chatted. Small talk about mutual friends, career changes, her art, his teaching job. I could tell he wasn't someone she had slept with or cried over. But he was someone from the time before everything shattered. Someone who knew her when she was still naive, soft, open in a way that hadn't yet turned cautious. Eventually, he glanced at his watch and said, "I'd love to catch up sometime. Coffee?" Layla hesitated just long enough for me to notice. Then she said, "Sure. Give me your number. I'll reach out." As we walked back to the car, I asked, "You okay?" She was quiet for a few steps. Then, "He used to like me. Back then, I didn't know what to do with people who liked me for the right reasons. So I ignored them. And now?" I asked. She looked out the window /. "Now I'm curious about what it would be like to let someone see the version of me that fought to be here." She didn't call Evan right away. She sat with the idea for a while. Let it breathe. She wasn't chasing anymore. She was evaluating. And I realized something then. She wasn't trying to be perfect or fixed. She was trying to be honest. And that version of her, the one that paused before leaping, the one that knew her scars but wasn't defined by them, was the strongest yet. A few days passed, and Layla didn't mention Evan again. Not during our late-night talks over tea. Not while we binge-watched old movies in silence. Not even when we passed by that same bookstore again on Wednesday. But I saw her thinking. Not in that obsessive, frantic way she used to when her mind was racing through self-doubt. This was different. Measured. Deliberate. She was letting herself process on her own terms. That Friday, I found her in the kitchen, barefoot, holding her phone like it was something alive. She was staring at the screen, unmoving. I didn't say anything. I just watched. Finally, she sighed, typed a short message, and hit send. Then she looked up at me with a crooked smile. I asked him to coffee. Sunday. Just to talk. I nodded, trying not to show too much relief. Good, I said. But what I really meant was brave. Sunday came with overcast skies and the scent of rain in the air. She wore a soft gray sweater and jeans, minimal makeup, her hair tied back loosely. She looked like herself. Not a version she curated for anyone else. Just Layla. I offered to drive her, but she shook her head. No. I need to do this solo. So I watched her walk out the door, steady, but not stiff, like someone reclaiming a part of their story. She came back 2 hours later. Quiet, but not closed off. She sat down next to me on the couch and tucked her feet under her. How was it? I asked. She smiled, not wide, not giddy, but warm, like the kind of smile that comes from exhaling after holding your breath for too long. He didn't try to fix me, didn't dig for pain or ask about rumors. He just listened. Told me about his students, this cat he adopted, how he still keeps all his books organized by color like a psycho. I laughed. She did too. Then she said something that stayed with me. Evan didn't treat me like I was broken. Just human. And I didn't feel like I had to prove anything to him. That night, she went to bed early. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't stay up worrying if she'd cry herself to sleep. I didn't check my phone for panic texts. I just let the quiet settle. And it felt good. The next week was calm. She didn't rush into anything with Evan. They exchanged a few messages. A photo of a bookstore window. A voice note about a poem he found. She didn't light up like a spark this time. She glowed softly, and that glow was hers. One evening, while we were folding laundry, she looked up and said, "You know, it's weird. I used to think I had to be in love to feel whole. But now I'm learning how to be full on my own." I nodded, folding one of her old band tees. That's not weird. That's growth. She looked at me, eyes glassy but steady. Thanks for staying. Even when I didn't want myself around. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just bumped her shoulder and smiled. I'm not going anywhere. And maybe, for the first time since all of this began, I believed it when she smiled back. Not because she was faking strength, but because she was finally starting to live in it. Not chasing love. Not performing pain. Just existing. And slowly, bravely healing. It started small. A second coffee with Evan turned into a walk through the park afterward. Then lunch on her day off. Then helping him set up his new bookshelf, where she alphabetized everything just to spite his color-coded system. I watched it all from the periphery. Not intruding. Not asking questions unless she offered answers. And she did sometimes. Little updates here and there. A funny thing, he said. A moment of quiet she hadn't expected to enjoy. And one night, as we sat on the porch watching the sky melt into dusk, she said, I'm not sure if I like him, or if I just like how I feel when I'm around him. I didn't answer right away. Because I felt it. The shift. The unspoken question, what do I mean to you? It wasn't jealousy exactly, but something quieter. Something that felt like losing a rhythm we'd built through months of collapse and slow reconstruction. Still, I smiled. I think maybe those two things can grow together, if you let them. She didn't look at me, but she nodded, slowly, and I knew I meant something else to her. Not less, not more, just different. And that had to be okay. Except it wasn't always easy. I started noticing the little gaps. Times she'd normally send me a meme or call late at night, and didn't. Evenings she spent at Evan's place instead of with me. And when I asked how she was doing, the way she answered felt rehearsed. Lighter than it used to be. Like she was protecting something. Maybe him. Maybe herself. I told myself it was a good sign. That she was healing. That she deserved to move forward. But there were moments, usually around 2 a.m., when I felt a hollow ache in my chest. Not because I wanted her to love me, but because I missed being needed. Then, one night, I heard a knock at my door. Late. Past midnight. I opened it, and there she was. Eyes swollen, sweater sleeves pulled over her hands like a child. I broke it off, she said. I was starting to feel like I needed his approval just to breathe again. And I promised myself I wouldn't do that anymore. I didn't say anything. Just stepped aside so she could come in. She sat on the couch, curled her knees to her chest, and whispered, he was good to me, really, but I don't think I'm ready for that kind of closeness. Not yet. I sat beside her, not too close. Just enough. After a long pause, she added, I don't want to lose you too. I looked at her then, really looked, at this woman who had unraveled and rebuilt herself in front of me, who had battled shame, loneliness, addiction to validation, and still kept standing. I'm still here, I said, and I meant it. She leaned her head on my shoulder. Not for rescue, not for romance, just for rest. And that night we didn't talk much. We just sat there. Two people who had seen each other at their worst, trying to figure out what it meant to stay even when the reasons changed. After that night, something quiet began to shift between us. Not all at once. Not in a way anyone else would notice. But I felt it in the way she lingered when we said goodbye. In the way her laughter settled lower in her throat when she was around me. She began to show up more often again. Bringing over groceries, insisting on cooking something completely out of season. She'd make too much and pretend she hadn't meant to. We'd eat late, cross-legged on the floor, sharing bites off each other's plates. There was a night in early spring when the power went out during a thunderstorm. We lit candles. She curled up in my hoodie, sipping wine, legs draped over mine like it was nothing. And then, in a lull between thunderclaps, she looked at me like she hadn't in a long time, like she was seeing something new backslash, or finally letting herself see what had been there the whole time. I think I'm starting to understand why you stayed, she said, even when I was messy, Even when I was a stranger to myself. I reached over, brushing a curl away from her cheek. Because I never stopped seeing you, Layla. Even when you couldn't. She blinked hard, eyes shimmering in the candlelight. Then she leaned in. Slow backslash. Deliberate. Her lips brushed mine, just barely, and pulled back. We both froze. Her voice came soft. I don't want to ruin us. We're not that fragile, I said, and this time I kissed her. Not to fix her. Not to claim her. But because it had been building for months. Years, maybe. The storm outside grew louder. But inside, everything was still. She melted into me like she'd finally allowed herself to rest. No performance. No need to impress. Just Layla. That night, we didn't rush. We stayed up talking until the candles burned low and the wine ran dry. Our fingers tangled, our knees brushing under the blanket. We talked about boundaries. About fear. About hope. And in the morning, she made coffee barefoot in my kitchen like she'd always belonged there. We didn't call it anything. Didn't update our statuses or tell anyone right away. It wasn't about labels. It was about presence. About choosing each other in small ways day after day. She still had hard days. Still got quiet sometimes. Still wrestled with guilt and old scars. But she let me hold that silence now backslash. Let me sit with her in it instead of running from it. And I think that's what love really looked like for us. Not a grand declaration, but a quiet decision to stay. Even when it got hard. Especially when it got hard. Because some people don't fall in love all at once. Some people grow into it like vines up the same wall. Tangled, stubborn, messy, but strong. Stronger than they ever were alone.